You're listening to Let's Talk Creation with Todd Wood and Paul Garner, the creation show where we learn, grow, and worship.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Let's Talk Creation with Paul Garner and Todd Wood. I'm Paul Garner.
And I'm Todd Wood.
And we are in the season of fundraising, Todd. We do this every year. Why don't you tell our viewers and listeners about ways that they can help to support the podcast?
Sure, yeah. It's time for a pledge break here. So I want to remind everybody that if you enjoy this podcast, we are basically dependent on donations to make it possible. Keep it going. It costs about $600 an episode, which works out to about $17,000 a year to put this production on. It's quite a big deal. So we appreciate your support. We're looking to basically pay for the podcast this December and November if we can. And if you would like to make a donation, you can go to letstalkcreation.org, and where you will find the donation pages for both Biblical Creation Trust and Core Academy of Science. If you're in the U.S., you can go straight to coresci.org/donate. That's coresci.org/donate, and that will give you instructions on where you can make a contribution. Paul, where would I go if I was in Europe or the UK?
Yeah, if you go to biblicalcreationtrust.org, there's a link to our giving page, and you can find all of the different ways to give right there.
All right, fabulous. And I also want to mention this. If you have an idea for an episode and you really want us to consider it, you could consider sponsoring a whole episode. We can also do sponsors if you're organizing a conference or you have a business that you would like to advertise. We can consider those as well. Just let us know or write us at podcast@coresci.org, and we will get back to you with that information on how you might be able to sponsor an episode. $600, that's an episode. So let us know. We did two of them this year, Paul. We did the Joshua Tree episode was
That's right.
a sponsored episode. And the Behemoth and Leviathan episode was a sponsored episode. So we're very grateful to all of our listeners and audience members who have made all of that possible.
Yeah. And they were great. They were really good episodes.
Yeah.
We really enjoyed doing those. Yeah. So anyway, let's come to the topic of today's episode. At the end of November, there is a very important celebration. Happens every year.
Sometimes,
And it's this year. It's the 23rd of November, and that is the 60th anniversary of the very first episode of Doctor Who being broadcast.
Naturally.
So I'm celebrating here in the UK and giving thanks for my favourite TV programme.
Yeah, there you go.
But I think you guys over there are doing something different on the 23rd of November.
We usually, we have this Thanksgiving holiday, right? It is basically an American holiday. I guess some other places have tried to adopt a thanks holiday as well, a gratitude holiday. But it's mostly an American thing. You guys are celebrating Doctor Who over there in the UK. Everybody else is going to work like it's a normal work day. But over here in the US, it's Thanksgiving week, and we're getting ready to gather with family and feast upon a feast of turkey and mashed potatoes and ham and all that good stuff. And and hopefully we take some time to also remember our Creator and give thanks for the good things that He has given us in creation, as well as for our salvation through Jesus Christ. Happy Thanksgiving, Paul. Or happy Doctor Who anniversary.
Well, happy Thanksgiving to you, Todd.
Thank you.
Yeah. And, we as we did last year, we want to do a special Thanksgiving episode. And so we were thinking about what topic to kind of pick. And we decided this year to talk about one of the great geological wonders of the world. And that is the Grand Canyon in Arizona. So every year, about 5 million tourists, I believe, come to visit the canyon, hike its trails, look at that incredible vista from the overlooks, and even some of them raft down the river.
Yeah.
And
have you been to the canyon, Paul?
I've been more than once. I've done the river trip.
Oh,
I've done the river trip. I've hiked some of the trails. Yeah.
Okay.
And you've also been to Grand Canyon.
I've been twice. Yep. Once as mostly a tourist, and another time I attempted some hiking on one of the off the beaten path trails, one of the rare trails. I thought I could get down to the Redwall limestone in a day. It turns out that's really not going to happen. So I spent 6 hours and basically made it to the Coconino sandstone, and then I turned around and came back because it was clear we were not going to get to the Redwall. But anyway, been there, hiked it, a lot of fun, beautiful place.
It's big, and it takes a while to hike down, doesn't it, to get to those rock units? Yeah. So we thought we'd talk about Grand Canyon, because Grand Canyon is more than simply this extraordinary natural feature. As we're going to find out in today's episode, it is also a remarkable testimony to what God has done in history, and to God's glory, and to his goodness. And so we thought that was a very appropriate topic for the Thanksgiving holiday. And to help us talk about this, we are being joined today by a very special guest, Nate Loper of Canyon Ministries. So Nate, welcome to the show. It's really good to have you.
Well, thanks, Paul. I'm glad to be here with you and with Todd and all the friends of Let's Talk Creation. So thanks. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you.
It's great to have you. Now, it's not the first time you've been on the podcast, because I did interview you when I was over at the ICC. So our viewers will have, perhaps if they saw that episode, they will have seen our interview. But Nate, for those who are not familiar with you and with Canyon Ministries, just tell us a bit about yourself and who you are and your background.
Yeah, so I get the amazing privilege of serving as the executive director for Canyon Ministries. And so since 1997, we have been running creation-based tours at the Grand Canyon National Park. River trips and backpacking trips and hiking tours and daily tours along the rim. So we do tours every day of the week except for Sunday, year round. And so between 3,000 and 4,000 people a year that join us on trips and tours through the Grand Canyon National Park. And Paul, I get the best job in the world. I get to come out there and see the Grand Canyon and call that my office and work with an amazing team of other guides that we have, really using that canyon for God's glory and showcasing that natural wonder to people all over the world, and using it as a tool to point them to Jesus Christ.
That's absolutely fantastic. Wow. Yeah, I mean, what a place to work. So you're executive director of Canyon Ministries, and you helped us sort of lead the tours. But what did you do before you joined Canyon Ministries? Just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so before that, I was a pastor. So I served as a pastor for about 12 years in ministry. And funny thing about that, originally, I thought I was going to go into geology. And so that was my plan. And I was going to go into geology and do things like that. And so that was the course that I had set. And God had other plans in mind, called me into ministry. I didn't finish up that degree in that course, so went into ministry. And Paul, at that point, I thought I was never going to use rocks and geology and science, because what use are rocks and geology and science in the church, right? So I just kind of thought, oh, that's just a side issue. Let me just leave that alone. And my passion, my interest, just put it to the side. Little did I know that God knew exactly what he was doing the whole time in knitting me together, you might say. In the midst of that, found out about organizations that, use rocks and science and geology, creation science, you might say. And it's like a light bulb just came on, and I was like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what God has called me to now. And all those interests, all those other passions are all things that he has placed in my heart. And so now what I get a chance to do, you guys, is I take God's word and I take those rocks and science and geology and daily get to put those things together. And it is phenomenal to be able to serve God in a way that you love and the passion that you have, and all those things given, I believe, by him. So I think it's pretty neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also understand you have a bit of an interest in Egyptology, although that's not the topic for today. Tell us about that.
Yeah, my background really educationally now currently is in archaeology. The focus on biblical archaeology, but especially Egyptology. And so I am finishing up a master's degree in ancient civilizations. And so my whole focus with this is Egyptology, basically dealing with the timeline of the entry of Jacob and Joseph into Israel all the way down to the time of Moses, kind of starting with this 12th dynasty, especially the second intermediate period. So just really trying to find and see where we find really solid evidence in Egypt and for the Hebrew people entering into that land. And so that's been my research project. And so just had a trip up there in Egypt in January, going back in November here. So actually,
Wow.
We'll be wrapping up that here by the end of November.
We're going to have you back.
Yeah, we're going to have you back and talk about that. So the multi-talented guy with lots of different interests, and yeah, that's something we haven't talked about on the podcast, but we'd love to do that. So anyway, the topic today, of course, is Grand Canyon, and you mentioned that you're executive director of Canyon Ministries.
Yeah,
and when I went into the canyon and I went on the raft trip, that was the first time I'd ever been to Grand Canyon. So that was my introduction to the canyon, was doing the whitewater sort of rafting. Fantastic way to begin.
Yeah.
The guy who led that raft trip was Tom Vale.
Mm-hmm.
So could you tell us, Nate, a bit about the kind of history of Canyon Ministries and the involvement of Tom, and just fill us in on how it all began?
Yeah, I would love to. It's a fantastic story. So Tom Vale, our founder, became a river guide in the Grand Canyon back in around 1983. And in those days, he wasn't a Christian. And so he, led people through the Grand Canyon, told the typical story of the millions and billions of years and, basically the line that he was given to tell. And in the midst of that, he started having his own questions even about the Grand Canyon and about this formation idea, because what he was being told to tell people didn't quite match up to what he was seeing in the rocks around him. And even then, he started questioning and saying, I'm not sure about that. In the midst of all that, he had a passenger who joined him on a river trip, and her name was Paula. And Paula was a Christian believer, and Paula kept having these questions for Tom, like, Tom, what is the meaning of life? And what happens after you die? And, all these questions that he didn't really think about, didn't really care about, but boy, she kept, talking to him about it. And they actually had a good friendship, a good relationship. And so after that trip, they stayed in touch back and forth. And Tom at one point was getting ready to do a backpacking trip in the Himalayas. And so as he was heading out to there, Paula had sent him a Bible and said, basically, Tom, something to read if you have any time. And, Tom, I don't think really thought he would have much time because he's backpacking, but he threw it in his bag. And well, God had a fantastic plan in mind, because when they got there to the base camp, there was a big snowstorm that came rolling in, and Tom had nothing to do for a few days but just sit there. And he pulled out this Bible and said, well, might as well start reading it. So he started reading it, and in the midst of that, really started getting excited and interested in reading about the life of Christ, and then going to the beginning of this book and reading about Genesis and the creation account and the flood, and things started to really make sense. And Paula had written in that book a prayer kind of on the inside cover, kind of a sinner's prayer. It is right there, kind of at the base of the Himalayas, that that Tom came to Christ at that point. And so through the act of one brave young woman, you might say, pestering this poor lost boatman, as Tom would say, he came to Christ. And so you might say that Paula helped lead him to Christ. And then not long after that, Tom led her down the aisle. So Tom and Paula Vale got married, and in 1997 founded Canyon Ministries, because at that point, Tom still loved the river. He had a whole nother love in his life, and that was Jesus Christ, and said, hey, I want to use this canyon and show people God's amazing creation. So that was the birth of Canyon Ministries. And since then, we've grown from about 11 people on a single river trip all the way to, like I said, 3,000 to 4,000 people a year that come through on trips and tours. And it's fantastic. It's an incredible story. You can read more about on those details on our website too, but just a beautiful story that how God works in the humblest and simplest of ways.
Yeah, that's great. And Tom has written a couple of books about Grand Canyon as well. I've actually got one of his books here. This is Grand Canyon, A Different View. He's a real character. I was so privileged to have him and the other guys leading that trip. It was great to get to know him. And actually, Tom came over to the UK after I'd been on the trip. He and Paula came over here, and he had a few speaking engagements here, and so it was great to have that connection with him.
Excellent.
So tell us, after this ministry began, tell us a bit about the subsequent history of the ministry and then how you came to be involved, Nate.
Yeah, so for the first few years, all we did were, these Christian river trips through the Grand Canyon. And then in 2013, we decided, let's expand what we're doing to more people and a little bit easier for some folks to do things like a tour along the rim, less time, less commitment. And some people just can't quite be on a river trip. There's some difficulties sometimes with the river. So we decided to start rim tours. And so those are basically tours along the rim of the Grand Canyon where we have our own vehicles and we take folks to the very best overlooks of the park while showcasing different things in geology that show us, the creation account and show us, where the flood began. So that started there. And then we developed some hiking tours. So going down like the South Kaibab Trail. So we've got a 5 to 6 hour hiking tour that happens. And so we're getting hands-on with some of the geology. We're getting down to places where we can get hands-on with these rocks and see that up close and personal. And then 2020, we decided let's start some backpacking trips. So multi-day backpacking trips, anywhere from 3 to 5 days across the Grand Canyon at times. And then also up into Utah, some places that we go up into the Grand Staircase. And so those backpacking trips through the Grand Canyon allow us to get down to places like, the Great Unconformity, where there's a massive erosional boundary where we believe the beginning of the flood happened, and really see fossils and those features of the canyon up close. And so that's what we're doing now. We are covering the canyon from top to bottom and basically everywhere in between.
That's great. The tour that I went on back in, I think it was May 2004, was run by the Institute for Creation Research. It was one of their trips. And as I say, Tom was the kind of river guide, and we had Andrew Snelling and Steve Austin with us as the two geologists. And the first time I saw Grand Canyon was when they took us out to Mather Point at sunset.
Yeah. And
we arrived, to watch the sun setting over Grand Canyon. And it was just fabulous, and I was kind of just awestruck with this vista, that was kind of spread out before us. I think I was quite quiet because one of the ICR people spoke to me and said, did you enjoy that? I think it's just our British sort of understated way,
yes.
But yeah, it was absolutely fabulous. And so if you get an opportunity to do the rim tour or the hiking tour, the backpacking, or if you get to go down the river, I really encourage you to do it because it's such a fabulous experience. And Nate, one of the other things that I know you've been involved in over the years are Christian leaders trips.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so for the past 15 years, we had run a Christian leaders trip. And so what that is kind of a scholarship-based trip where we invite Christian leaders from around the world to join us on a 7-day river trip through the Grand Canyon. And so these are leaders of like Christian denominations, of seminaries, a lot of people basically, we try to get people down there to really teach the teachers and, influence the influencers. And so we specifically designed that trip not just full of a bunch of young earth creationists, but maybe some people who also, are Christians, but maybe believe in an old earth creation, as well as some who are maybe kind of on the fence and never really thought about the issue so much. We intentionally bring a mixed group so that we can have the best amount of conversation and discussion and dialogue. And those trips have a lot of teaching involved in there. And that was actually my first river trip through the Grand Canyon as well. I was invited back in 2011 to join them on the Christian leaders trip. And so you might say, Paul, that I'm here now. I've been here going on 10 years with Canyon Ministries, but I'm here as a result of that Christian leaders trip as well. And so now currently we are looking to expand that idea and that vision of kind of scholarship-based trips and engaging in many other ways beyond just the single river trip Christian leaders trip. But Paul, I know you've also been on that Christian leaders trip as well, haven't you?
Well, it was an ICR trip, but
okay.
it was at the invitation of ICR. They asked me to go on that trip.
And you had a lot of great teachers and speakers on that trip, I'm sure.
We did. It was really, I mean, what an experience, to be able to raft down the river. I made the mistake on the first day of sitting right at the front of the raft and finding that you got completely soaked every time you went through the rapids. So
absolutely,
but you soon dry out because it's so hot. But what a fabulous experience. Todd, you haven't been down the river, but no. you've kind of hiked into Grand Canyon. I mean, what are your impressions of Grand Canyon when you saw it for the first time?
It's overwhelming in scale. I think that's really, you see pictures of it and you sort of think, okay, I get it. I know what this is. And then you get there and it's so much bigger and grander than you really are able to appreciate, I think. It's just overwhelming. The size is just astonishing. And that's my big memory when I first drove up and parked and got out and walked up to the rim and just thinking, this is gigantic. Yeah. This is just gigantic. And then you'd think that would do it, right? And I would be prepared. The second time I took my wife and we went, and we were absolutely convinced we were going to hike into the canyon, like I said, down to the red wall, which is pretty far down. We picked a trail, in we go, and it is treacherous going. It is very steep going into the canyon, and it's 3 hours into the hike, and we can see that we are not getting close to our destination. And we know we don't want to be caught down there in the heat of the day and getting dehydrated and so forth. And so then we hit the Coconino. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Coconino is like not quite the very top, but it's right underneath the top layers of the canyon. But it's barely in there. And I realized this thing is so much bigger than you can possibly imagine. Yeah. So we ended up turning around at that point and going back to our rental car. So that was 6 a.m. to 1 p.m. hike there. And we basically just literally scratched the surface of the canyon. Yeah. It's just overwhelming and beautiful and astonishing.
Yeah. Two things that made me realize, how enormous the canyon is. When you're on the river trip and you begin by going through Marble Canyon from Lee's Ferry, and when you come out of Marble Canyon and you get into sort of the Grand Canyon proper, it just opens up. Mm-hmm. There's just this vast sort of canyon, and you realize how far away the north and south rims are. And it's just this sort of big open space. It's just incredible. You get a different sense, I think, when you're on the river than you do just looking in from the rim. Sure. And the other thing was when we hiked out along the Bright Angel Trail, and you think you're sort of beginning to get near the top, and it's not until actually you begin to see the people on the overlooks and you see how tiny they are, you realize how badly you misjudged the distances, because there's just nothing for scale, to kind of, Wow.
So, how long is the hike from Bright Angel, from the river to the rim on Bright Angel? Typically.
I'm trying to remember how long it took us. I mean, it was some hours, because you kind of go up these switchbacks. Right. I think they call it the Devil's Corkscrew, and then you get onto the Tonto platform, and it all sort of levels out a bit, and then you kind of, it gets steep again, and there are lots of switchbacks again, and wow. It's a long hike. Yeah, it's a long hike. Yeah. I can't remember how many hours it took me, but yeah. Anyway, so absolutely fantastic. Right. Nate, people have got to visit, right? So they've got to come and see it for themselves. Yeah. Now I know that when I looked at the Canyon Ministries website, I had a look at your mission statement, and the mission statement says that your ministry is dedicated to presenting the evidence in and around Grand Canyon which supports a young Earth. So I thought we ought to talk about this. So we ought to talk about some of the ways that Grand Canyon sort of showcases the evidence for creation in the young Earth, because that's one of the things you want to go and show people, right? So, right. yeah, just tell us some of the things that people are going to see, and how you help to sort of interpret it for them.
Yeah, so some of those features that we find in the Grand Canyon, I think, really are a testimony to the global flood in Noah's day. We start off with a foundational belief that God created things as recorded in the Bible's book of Genesis. And then Genesis 6, 7, and 8 talk about the ark and the flood. And I think when you understand what the flood is all about, you realize that this is the largest geological change, perhaps that the world has seen before or since. It's a major, huge catastrophe that the Bible actually outlines for us. And so when you understand that, you start with scripture, I think it helps us understand a lot of what we see in the world around us in science. And so some of those things that we see and point out, one of my favorite things to talk about as we're down there and pointing out the layers of the canyon is really the beginning of these kind of flat, horizontal sedimentary rock units. And starting with the Tapeats sandstone, we have this stack of layers working their way up. And at the bottom of that Tapeats sandstone, what we find is a feature known as the Great Unconformity. Now, the Great Unconformity is a place where the rocks don't conform, you might say. And so really an unconformity represents a pretty big erosional boundary. Now, we have multiple unconformities within the Grand Canyon, and geologists call unconformities around the world. But this is the Great Unconformity because there's a pretty good amount of erosion. And this physical feature is found many places around the world. So if you think about it, if you have a worldwide physical feature, there must have been a worldwide mechanism or worldwide event, you might say, to be able to produce it. And that worldwide event and mechanism, this is a massive amount of erosion. And when we look at that first rock layer, that Tapeats sandstone, we have direct physical evidence, and geologists agree with this, that it was deposited by fast-moving water. So if you start to put it together and think about it, we have direct evidence that there was a worldwide physical feature, worldwide event of fast-moving water, because that same Tapeats sandstone equivalent you can trace across the United States, you can trace across North Africa, and continuing on to the east. And so we see that same kind of sandstone unit. And so the way that we interpret that, the way that we see that, this, we believe, is part of the beginning of the flood in Noah's day, right around the beginning stages. Underneath that level, underneath that Tapeats sandstone, we really don't have a fossil record by and large. It's in that Tapeats sandstone and then on up. The fossil record is where we actually find it around the world. That Great Unconformity is also where we have what's called that Cambrian explosion, an explosion of life, they say, within the fossil record. But really, fossils are not living things. They are dead things, right? And so I would say it's not an explosion of life that we find worldwide. Rather, it's an explosion of death that we find worldwide. Death and burial and water-laid sediments, and that's around the world. So you might say there's an explosion of erosion coinciding with this Cambrian explosion. And again, those two things are a worldwide feature. And to me, when I start thinking about it, I see this as the beginning of the flood because it's exactly the kind of thing you'd expect to find. Worldwide waters carrying tremendous amounts of dirt, debris, and sediment across the world, burying plants and animals, and starting across the world a massive amount of destruction. And so I see that as hand in hand. So for me, if I were to point out like one physical feature, that's what I would showcase. But we have a lot of other stuff, and that's why it takes us, a 4-hour tour is the shortest tour we do. But even then, we can't pack in all the geology. Even on a 7 or 9 day river trip, we still don't get to everything we could cover. And that is the glory of God, as he is, we can't comprehend his glory, nor all the events of creation. And the Grand Canyon doesn't speak to everything, but I think there are some really key features we find there. And Paul, I don't think there's a better place on the planet to see and to study and to understand flood geology like we have at the Grand Canyon. That's why we do what we do. That's why we do those tours there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great place because you've got a really good cross section through the geological column, particularly if you then include the younger rocks, as you were mentioning earlier. As you go kind of northwards into southern Utah, you begin to climb that grand staircase and you get into the younger sediments. So you've got a really nice geological column. And because northern Arizona is basically hot and dry, it's not like the eastern US where it's all covered up in vegetation. It's the rocks are nicely exposed, so you can see the rocks. And
geology in the Smoky Mountains is a bit tedious because you just have to keep driving until you find a little road cut or something where the rocks are exposed.
Exactly. We do many trips with Andrew Snelling, and he's always, he's glad for that, but he's always talking about those pesky plants that get in the way of his rocks, So
yeah,
we have a great feature here.
Yeah, that's great. And the Tapete sandstone is not the only rock unit like that, this sedimentary rock layer that's so enormously widespread, because several of the other layers that are exposed at Grand Canyon are the same, isn't that right?
Yeah. Some of those layers, kind of more regional. Some of those, like near the top, Todd, you were talking about going down the Coconino sandstone. Well, that layer of rock we find from Mexico all the way up into Canada.
Yeah.
And so if you have a distribution of that size and enormity across the continent, I mean, this is a pretty big event. Similar to with that grand staircase you were talking about, Paul. We've got layers up there like the Navajo sandstone, which is one of the single thickest sandstone layers on the continent here. And the geologists that are there, they talk about the Navajo sandstone, and they say that the Navajo sandstone there came from the Appalachians. It was eroded from there and transported across the continent and somehow deposited here. Yet they're still trying to figure out how in the world it got from there thousands of miles over here to this location. And I'm looking and saying, yep, there's a big flood. There's a lot of water that carries and transports stuff. And so, we are still doing ongoing research and finding things. I mean, some of those studies by like John Whitmore, who's the Cedarville University professor there doing geology, studying places like the Navajo sandstone and really, I think, finding good, solid evidence that this, for example, was not deposited by wind-blown sand in a desert Aeolian environment, but this is waterborne sediment. And so, of course, it starts to point to a global flood event.
Yeah. So we've got these widespread sedimentary layers. They mostly contain marine fossils. If you look in the Kaibab limestone or the Redwall limestone, so you got these marine fossils high above sea level. I mean, how high is Grand Canyon above sea level, Nate?
Yeah, so on the south rim, we're typically 7,000 to 7,400 feet. The north rim gets nearly 9,000 feet up on the rim.
Yeah. So you've got these marine fossils in these widespread sedimentary rock layers, and often transported, as you say, long distances. So you can do these kind of provenance studies where you can work out, where the sand has come from. One of the really interesting things that I remember seeing when I was in Grand Canyon was the nautiloid bed in the Redwall limestone, which Steve Austin has described. Tell us about that, because it's just such a fabulous example of rapid deposition of fossils and rapid deposition of sediments.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Steve. I was just out here with Steve Austin last week. Brought him out to do some field research in the area, some discoveries that he and I have been working on. And, we had our paper at ICC, so we're still continuing to do research. I mean, real scientists doing real research. Imagine that.
Yeah.
So Steve Austin, though, one of the premier guys who has studied these nautiloids in the Grand Canyon. And so a nautiloid is kind of like the type of squid that lives in this long, shell, almost shaped like a ice cream cone or like a long cigar. And so they are found at the bottom of the Redwall limestone in a layer known as the Whitmore layer. And so that's kind of a 6 to 7 foot thick bed right at the bottom of the Redwall. So Steve Austin noticed that there's a lot of those there. So they started to analyze them to start to kind of do some counts and surveys. And also, importantly, to kind of look at the orientation or the direction. And so they're tracing them through the Grand Canyon. He was doing research studies that you can find the same nautiloid bed from there all the way on eastern Grand Canyon, all the way to Las Vegas and beyond. So estimations in the millions and millions of these nautiloids that they estimate are found throughout this layer. And they started doing orientation, calculations and figuring out which direction they're pointing and orienting. And by and large, there is a strong prevalence of orientation to these nautiloids that are found in the fossil record there, which makes no sense really if they were simply living in an ocean for millions of years, slowly falling to the ocean floor in different ways and slowly, being covered by sediment, slowly becoming fossils. That makes no sense if they're all oriented. It's not like if I'm a nautiloid and I get ready to die and I tell my son, hey, when I die, I want you to go and bury me right next to Pappy, just how he died, right? Lay me right next to him. I'm not going to do that. But what we see is there's orientation, there's directionality, which indicates that this entire bed of sediment, this entire bed of these nautiloids was not slow, gradual deposition, but this is a catastrophic flow, you might say, that we believe that buried them and oriented them because of the direction of the water concurrent and the way that almost like a weather vane, you might say, is oriented these nautiloid shells. And so it indicates that this whole sequence was a rapid burial by fast moving water. Sounds like a flood.
It does. There are so many ways that, Grand Canyon testifies to the judgment that took place in the, days of Noah. One of the other things that we saw when we went into the canyon, and talking about the Red Wall kind of reminded me, is Red Wall Cavern.
Yes.
This was incredible, because you kind of come round I don't know whether you come around a bend in the river and you catch that sort of first sight of Red Wall Cavern. And at first it just looks like a little notch in the base of the cliff. And as you get closer, you realize how you'd misjudged the scale. This cavern is enormous. And we disembarked, and we kind of looked around Red Wall Cavern. I mean, it's big enough to hold like a concert in, isn't it? And have a huge audience. It's massive.
Absolutely. It's my favorite feature in the Grand Canyon. And so on some of the river trips we go on, we have Dr. Danny Faulkner from Answers in Genesis. We do astronomy and geology trips. And so Danny and I love the Red Wall Cavern so much that we have established the Royal Order of the Red Wall. And so you can join that, Paul, if you would like. If you like Red Wall Cavern, if that's your favorite layer, we would love to accept you as a member in the Royal Order of the Red Wall. It is a beautiful cavern. You're right. And it's a massive, huge cavern from the river. You barely even know what it is. And you get in there, and it's said that back in 1869, when John Wesley Powell first went through there, he surveyed and estimated you could fit 40,000 people within this huge cavern. It's a massive, huge amphitheater-like cavern with beautiful sand in there. And it is my personal favorite feature on all these river trips. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fabulous. I mean, there's just so many things to see. And I was, in preparation for recording this episode with you, I was thinking back and looking through my photos of the Grand Canyon trip, and so many good memories came back of things that we'd seen. One of the other things, Nate, that I just wanted to talk to you about, and again, it was one of the things I saw on the trip, was we did a hike into Carbon Canyon, and we saw that incredible fold. So you talked about the Tapete Sandstone. But there is this incredible fold in the Tapete Sandstone where it's kind of just, it's been twisted sort of vertically by the uplift of the plateau. You've got the East Kaibab monocline.
Right.
And I know Andrew Snelling has been doing a bit of research on this folding, and I'm sure you know about that. So just tell our listeners a bit about what he's discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have multiple folds within the Grand Canyon, especially within the Tapete Sandstone. And that Carbon Canyon fold is one of the most spectacular of those folds. The entire sequence has been folded up basically in 90 degrees. And folks can see that in the new film, the Is Genesis History Mountains After the Flood film. And that showcases the research project that we did with Dr. Snelling. And so right away, you see our founder, Tom Vale, and Paula, and our whole trip. So we did that trip for them in 2017, kind of a joint trip. And you get to really see this beautiful fold in the rock. And so what we look at with this fold is it seems to us that this is what we call, soft sediment deformation. In other words, this entire package of the Tapete Sandstone was deposited fairly rapidly and then bent and folded rapidly, fairly quickly, I would say, before it had a chance to really lithify, to really become solid rock. This thing is bent. And so what we see is it's really difficult to bend solid rock, right? If you have a slab of concrete, I know that, Todd, you are a super strong guy there. But even if you were to bend that, it's going to take a little bit of strength. But even if you try to bend it, it's going to fracture. It's going to snap, right? What you need to do if you're going to bend that concrete and bend it smoothly in places, you need to be able to bend it while it was still soft and pliable and plastic, you might say. Kind of like plaster of Paris or concrete, it sets up, it firms up, but what you need to do to make an impression or to bend it is while it's still soft. That's the case that we see with many rock folds in the Grand Canyon, especially the carbon fold. Now, there are some cracks and fractures in different places, but by and large, we see a lot of smooth, unbroken, uniform features. And the research that Andrew was especially doing was showing that this has not been bent or folded through tectonic pressure, through metamorphic pressures and things like that. If that's the case, if we have enough heat and pressure to bend and to move that rock, then it would cause metamorphic changes within the rock, especially at the bends. So the research sample was getting from a sample collected from that area with permits from the park to go down, to collect those samples, take them back, put them under the microscope, and really truly see, has there been, deformation within the material by, metamorphic pressures and heat. And so the result that we're looking at is no, this was not bent out of shape by, typical tectonic force, the slow, gradual processes over millions of years. This was bent while it was still soft and unconsolidated, unlithified, you might say. In other words, it shows us this entire package, we believe, was deposited rapidly. And then quickly after that, the whole thing was bent out of shape. And what that tells us is it did not take millions of years of slow, gradual accumulation for this entire sequence of the tapetes to be deposited. It was deposited all together as a package, and then it was bent out of shape as a package fairly recently, or fairly quickly after it was deposited, you would say.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting research, and people can go and check out Andrew's papers. He's been publishing a series of papers in the Answers Research Journal, so we'll link to that in the show notes. And then we talked there about the uplift of the Colorado Plateau, which was really when this sort of folding happened. But then once the plateau had been uplifted, of course, Grand Canyon itself was then carved through that uplifted plateau. And I know you've been doing some research. We talked a bit about that when we did the ICC episode, but just for those who didn't hear that, just remind our listeners what you're doing with Steve Austin there to research how the Grand Canyon was carved.
Yeah, so one of the ideas of Grand Canyon formation, and really I would say most creation geologists out there tend to hold to an idea that the Grand Canyon itself was carved in a post-flood event, a post-flood, more regional catastrophic event. And that has to do with some massive, huge lake systems that were ponded up in the middle of the Colorado Plateau. Now, that Colorado Plateau is not exactly flat across. The Colorado Plateau is actually shaped like a giant bowl, and it has kind of a big rim of mountains on the perimeter. So naturally, in that bowl, you would have a big, massive water system collect. And so we see that this massive lake system held thousands of cubic miles of water. And one of the areas that we really have been researching for the last 3 or 4 years has been this area known as Hopi Lake, sometimes known as Lake Bittahoche. This was identified back in the 1800s, guys like John S. Newberry, who discovered this, and really had to do with some of the original ideas of Grand Canyon formation. Originally, geologists looked at the Grand Canyon, they said this appears to have been carved out catastrophically by a lot of water. That was actually some of the first original ideas. And so some geologists now, even everyday secular geologists, not creationists, not Christians, are actually starting to go back to that idea and look at maybe there's catastrophe and basically a lake spillover. This Kaibab Plateau would have acted as a natural earthen dam, and this water from a massive lake system would have been rising up, and either by spillover or somehow maybe an earthquake that triggered a break, some different mechanism, but it starts this triggering event where water starts to spill through the plateau, and as it does, it cuts down into it. Well, you start to erode the plateau, you erode the wall of the dam, and more water starts to surge through. More water means more erosion means more water, and pretty soon you end up with a catastrophic exponential runaway process that basically drains thousands of cubic miles of water through one single exit route, and it carves its escape route as it drains off the plateau. So our research is really focused on this Hopi Lake, this Lake Bittahoche region, because one of the things that people have talked about is if there was a big lake, we should see perhaps shorelines from that lake. And so I think what we're looking at, what we're identifying are these shoreline terraces that we've been identifying. And so Steve Austin and a few other guys, I had them come out last year to do some work on that. And then they just came out last week. We had a few people that came out to take a look at this. And so we had Dr. Steve Austin and Tom Folks, who's another one of our research paper authors, came out here. And we brought Mike Ord as well to come out here and take a look at this landscape and to really just spend 2 or 3 days surveying this whole area and going out to the Bittahoche Formation, which is this freshwater lake system. And so it's neat. It's exciting that, yes, as scientists, we do have theories and we test those theories and we do research. And so, yeah, creation scientists can do real research, real work in the field. And so that's the exciting thing. We still have theories we're working on and developing. And I think it's an exciting time to live when we can do good science and good work like that. So we're hoping to have some more research done, but you can see that paper should be published when the ICC publishes all those papers from the proceedings. And so we do have a kind of a lengthy, more technical paper on that there.
That's absolutely fabulous, and it is exciting to see all of this research going on, and to see a prediction being made like that. If there was this lake, we ought to find these lake terraces, and then you go out and you found some things that look like lake terraces. So what do you know?
So can I clarify this lake issue for everybody listening and watching here? When you talk about finding these lakes out there, you're not talking about a body of water anymore, right?
Correct.
This is
evidence of where
a lake was.
Right, where a lake was. And so if you're looking for where a lake of that size was, you'd expect to find some lake bed sediment, which we believe is that Beta-Hochi Formation. And you'd expect to find a place where the lake would have maybe been cutting into the landscape, or what we call as a transgressive rising lakeshore. And so that's what we're looking at. The water's completely gone. You're right, Todd. It's gone. It's drained through the Grand Canyon.
Because I'm thinking,
injected all
northern Arizona, there ain't no lake up there.
We don't have a water right here, but we're looking for, what is the fingerprint of where a lake could have been. And so that's, I think, what we've been working on identifying, looking at tufa, which are, calcium carbonate deposits from a freshwater lake system and things like that. So we're looking for the smoking gun, so to speak. And we're working on that research right now.
And Lake Beta-Hochi here, that's pretty big. That was pretty big. If you drive east along the interstate there from Flagstaff out of the state, you're basically driving across what was that lake, right? I mean, that's basically the lake bed there. Yeah, so that's a large area.
Very large area. The Beta-Hochi Basin, we oftentimes refer to it as. And you can see it. Yesterday, I was actually leading a tour through Wupatki National Monument, looking at some native ruins. But you drive into that basin. You can look all the way across to the other side to the Hopi Buttes, where the other shoreline area would have been. And it's a massive, huge basin. And in some places, that lake, we estimate, would have been over, 1,000 to maybe 2,000 feet deep in some places. Wow. This is a big body of water.
Wow. Yeah. And gone now.
Wow.
Gone now, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. There's so much to talk about, and we could go on and talk about lots of other aspects of Grand Canyon. But I wanted to come on in this kind of last part of the podcast to think about Grand Canyon as a testimony to God's glory. And I realize, for many people when they come to Grand Canyon, it really is a life-changing experience. It was a life-changing experience for Tom Vale. And it is for many others. And, you stand there on the rim and you look out at this remarkable vista, and it's humbling. You feel very small, and, you get a sense of, how enormous this feature is. And, and it really kind of puts you in your place. So tell us, Nate, just about maybe some of the testimonies that you might have heard from people who've, shared Grand Canyon, with you on these tours, and some of the experiences people have had. And just share about that, please.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have spent right around 1,000 tour days in the Grand Canyon National Park myself with folks on there, thousands of people. And there are so many stories I could tell you of people's, first view of the Grand Canyon, literally just being moved to tears at the sight of that. Sure. And just saying how good God is, that we see such incredible beauty. I've had people on tours. I had one guy from Arizona here who'd seen the Grand Canyon about 50 different times, he said. And he said, I've seen this, 40, 50 times, but I feel like today I've seen it for the very first time. I never knew what the significance of this, And so when we look at a place like the Grand Canyon, absolutely, we can see the beauty on display. We can see God's glory on display. But it goes further and deeper than that. When you understand what we are actually looking at, it's a massive watery graveyard of that flood in Noah's day. We're standing on top of thousands of feet of layers of destruction. Yet even in that destruction, we see amazing beauty, right? God has given us beauty from ashes, you might say. God has taken something, even the destruction of the flood, but he's created something that 5 to 6 million people every year come to marvel at and to delight in his works. And you see that God has created this beautiful landscape really from destruction. And in many ways, what that says to me, Paul, is it shows us the heart of God, that God is all about the business of redemption and of restoration. God, as a righteous judge, has to judge sin. But what he didn't have to do was give us a beautiful, incredible world as a result of that destruction. God has chosen to give us beauty around the world. It's a testimony of his heart of love for us, that in the post-flood world, we can still marvel at his works and say, wow, look at that. And the Grand Canyon is a testimony of that. And so when people gain that understanding of looking at the Grand Canyon and realizing, as beautiful as it is, it's really a sign of destruction. Yet in that, God has given us incredible things. It really shows us, boy, God really does love us. God really is all about redemption and restoration. In many ways, we talk about the flood and the ark in Noah's day as a way of salvation. The rocks of the canyon, you might say those rocks cry out, and they are a testimony of that flood event. They're a testimony of the ark and of the salvation that God gave to Noah and his family and those animals. But that ark and that event are really a foreshadowing of the salvation provided to us today through Jesus Christ. Not a wooden door and a wooden ark, but through the door, which is Jesus Christ himself. And that's what he said. Behold, I am the door, right? And so we can enter through that door of salvation, through Jesus Christ. And so when we take people on these trips, whether it's a 4-hour rim tour or a 9-day river trip, we are showing them the heart of God on display. And the plan of salvation is clearly laid out for us. The canyon is a testimony of the judgment in Genesis, and it also speaks to the judgment in Revelation, but it also speaks to the love, the mercy, the redemption of God that is available for all if we simply choose to walk through the door, which is Jesus Christ. And so there is so much on display at the canyon, and that ultimately is what people walk away with, a deeper knowledge of God, a closer relationship with him. Our purpose, our goal really is to bring glory to God through that canyon and to help people move one step closer to heaven. And so they see that, and people walk away with lives changed and transformed. And I still get emails and messages and talking to people from river trips that I did, nearly 10 years ago. And it's God has a way of speaking through his creation. We just help get them there. And we serve as a voice in the wilderness, a literal wilderness there, to show the glory of God. And it is so exciting.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And I remember another occasion when I was in Grand Canyon, not on the river trip, but I was doing field work with John Whitmore on the Coconino project. And a group of us were in the canyon, and a storm came over. And we kind of sheltered, from the rain, and it was very spectacular. And the thunder sort of bounced off the walls of the canyon and echoed around the canyon. It was an amazing experience. And then, of course, after the storm, we have the rainbow. And if you put those things together, we've got Grand Canyon, this testimony to judgment, and you've got the rainbow over the canyon, a testimony to God's grace and his restraint in giving us time to repent and to come to him. And we see those two things together, don't we? We see judgment and we see God's mercy. And it also just makes me, when we see the beauty of this world that has been marred and spoilt by sin, and we've had the destruction of the flood, and yet it's this world of such incredible beauty. I wonder what the new heavens and the new earth are going to be like when those, how much more beautiful, how much more wonderful they're going to be. So yeah, it's absolutely a fantastic place to remind us of all of that. Todd, anything to add?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, this has been a pretty tremendous episode. I'm very thankful for creation and for people like Nate who can take us through and point it out to us. I lead my own little nature tours here in Tennessee, and it is remarkable how much people get out of it when you just show them things. You just sort of stop and sort of settle down and look at this rock over here, look at this plant over here, and tell them a story. It's a powerful, powerful thing, and to do that, to have the privilege of doing that in Grand Canyon, that would be amazing. That would be amazing.
Yeah. And one of my enduring memories, of being in the canyon on the river trip were the times when we were able to have devotions together in the canyon. I mean, what a place! What a place to worship God and to read His Word, and with all of this incredible stuff around you. Just such a memorable experience. So, Nate, if people want to find out more about Canyon Ministries and they want to come on one of these trips, how do they find out more information about you?
Yeah, so the easiest way is just simply visit our website, canyonministries.org. Or if somehow they can't remember that name, just Google search Grand Canyon Christian Tour, Grand Canyon Creation Tour, Grand Canyon Ministry. We'll be the first thing up there. We are the only daily operating creation tour in the Grand Canyon National Park. So they can find us on there. They can also find us on things like Tripadvisor and things like that. Neat thing is, we are rated the number one activity out of 49 activities. So number one outdoor activity in the Grand Canyon National Park on Tripadvisor. So a lot of people find out through that way too, just jumping on and reading information and finding out about that. So, and the best thing that people can do is tell their friends about us. If they've got somebody coming out, send them our way. And they don't have to be Christian believers. We take anybody from all walks of faith or no faith at all, and just to show them God's creation. So that's the easiest way. Go on our website.
That's great. Well, do go and check out the website. We'll put a link to that, obviously, in the show notes. And we hope that people will go and support the ministry and find out more about what you do. Nate, it's been absolutely fabulous to have you. It's been really a great episode, and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was great to be with you guys again.
Thank you. Everybody, do remember our fundraising drive at the moment. Do remember you can go to letstalkcreation.org and you'll find links as to how you can support the podcast. Also, you can go to corsai.org if you're in the US. If you're in the UK or in Europe, you can go to biblicalcreationtrust.org. We really do appreciate it. We're very grateful for all of our listeners and everybody who supports us. Well, that's it. I think it's time to wind up this episode, but we will be back in another couple of weeks. I'm not sure what we're going to be doing then, but come and join us, and I'm sure it'll be fun, whatever it is. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
See you later.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Creation. For more information, visit us at letstalkcreation.org, where you'll find an archive of past episodes and all our show notes. If you'd like to leave a comment or make a suggestion, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Let's Talk Creation is brought to you in the U.S. by Core Academy of Science and in the U.K. by Biblical Creation Trust. As a listener-supported ministry, we are grateful for all of your financial support. Find out how you can make a contribution at our website, letstalkcreation.org. Also remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. Thanks, and see you next time.